Well, we are in Proverbs. If you join us online or joining us here through the summer, we're studying through Proverbs and we're looking at principles from Scripture that we can apply to our lives directly. And so we've made this statement, kind of this promise from the very beginning. It's this, that your life will be better if you live according to God's principles. You're going to have a better life, however you define that, however it's quantified, if you take God's principles and you apply them to your life. Principles are so powerful that oftentimes they're more powerful than our prayers, more powerful than our intentions, our wishes, our hopes. And so it's one thing for you, if you think about the future of your life, to want or to wish or even to pray that you'll be in some place in the future. But if you're living contrary to God's principles, those principles, they're going to overpower your wishes and your prayers and your hopes and your intentions. And so what we're looking at this summer are 9 very practical principles that you can take and apply to your life. I want to begin my message today by sharing with you there's a place up in Montana back in the 1800s, and prior to that, it's known as the Yom Pushkin Buffalo Jump. And this was a place that Native Americans had figured out if they could herd up enough buffaloes, gather around them and push them toward, it was a tall cliff, and underneath this tall cliff was a huge, deep gorge. If they could take them and push them in one direction, in the frenzy and the stampede of the dust boiling up and the hooves thundering against the ground, that those buffaloes would move in the direction of that buffalo jump and not realize they were headed toward destruction. And so what they would do is they would round up enough buffaloes that could create a stampede and could create confusion, push them toward this buffalo jump, and one by one by one, those buffaloes would go over the edge, fall down, break bones, die, suffocate. So much so that today say that at this particular location, one of the largest buffalo jumps known, there are a pile of bones 13 feet in height. Over the course of years, hundreds and thousands of buffaloes fell to their death for this very reason. They did not know that danger was on the horizon. Here's what I need for you to know today. For the passage that we're going to study, we're going to look at, you need to know this. It may not feel like it. You may feel like you're just out there grazing in the open field, out in the open pasture. Everything is good in your life right now. Here's what you need to understand. Danger is on the horizon. All of us, I don't know what background, belief system you come from, we have an enemy of our soul. His name is Satan, the devil. He wants to steal, to kill, destroy. And his agenda, his tactic, his scheme is to go about like a lion, somebody who's creeping and prowling along, so that you never know what his plans for your life are. His goal for you is to bring destruction, is to bring pain, is to bring devastation. And there are 2 realities that you need to embrace as we get ready to open this passage. They're going to help show you the relevance of what we're talking about today. The first reality you need to embrace is this, that the choices you're making, so like right now, the very choices that you're making will lead to either joy or sorrow in your future. Now, quick poll, how many of us want greater sorrow in the future? Very few of us would say no. How many of us would say, yeah, I want greater joy? I want greater meaning. I want reward, not regret. We have to understand that the choices we're making today are going to lead to future joy or future sorrow. The second reality is tied in with this, that building a life takes decades. Now, building life, whatever that looks like for you, building a family, building a marriage, building a career, there's a reason when somebody is 20, 22, and they graduate from college, we say they're beginning their life, right? They're starting their life. When somebody gets into their 30s or 40s, they're continuing to build their life. Their life's not complete. We all understand this intuitively. It takes decades to build a life. But here's what's also true. Building a life takes decades. Ruining it takes one season. And all of us, perhaps some of you, maybe you've experienced this. If you haven't experienced this, you know of someone who spent years and decades building their life. building their marriage, building their family, building their career. But in one season, one poor choice of a relationship, one poor choice of a business decision, one poor choice to take a drink or inject a drug, one poor season can ruin an entire life. If you think about the buffaloes, when they went through their daily life, they had made lots and lots of good decisions. They had grazed every day for years. They had avoided predators every day for years. It just took one moment, not being aware, not being attentive, not being present to the danger on the horizon for them to fall to destruction. And so what I want to show you this morning is a prayer for those of you who, if you have children or grandchildren, I want to encourage you today. I'm going to share with you a prayer on the back end of this message that you need to be praying for them. It's a preventative type prayer, and we're going to look at some ways to establish guardrails in your life, ways that are going to help you avoid this principle. If you'll open with me to Proverbs 22, verse 3. Proverbs 22, verse 3. Let's see the first half of this verse. We read as follows. It says, "The prudent see the evil and hides himself." Now we'll see in just a moment that this is a parable of contrast. He's talking here about the prudent. He's going to contrast the prudent with the naive, the simple, the foolish person. And here's what you need to understand about the prudent person that Solomon is talking about here. He builds in much of Proverbs this definition of what a wise or a prudent person looks like. We don't often use the word prudent today. Mark the characteristic definition of a prudent person. They understand that life is connected. They understand that there is a cause and effect, that there's this interconnectedness to the way that life works. We've looked here at the principle of sowing and reaping. They understand that what you do today affects your life tomorrow. The choices that you're making today, the investments that you're making today, the things that you're doing today, those result in greater joy or greater sorrow in the future. The prudent person, here's the main thing to understand, their filter that they use when they're thinking, is this something that I want to do or should I back away? Is this something that I should move forward to or no, I don't want to do this? Their filter, the prudent person's filter, is the future. They're the kind of person who understands, they look at what's going on, they don't evaluate what they see through the lens of what feels good in the moment. They're aware not just of the direction, they're aware of the destination. They're aware of where this choice leads in the future. They're the kind of person who they see evil, and it says he hides himself. The story has been used for years by preachers. It's kind of cheesy and corny, but it's been used for years, so I'll use it here today. There's a story of a man who's going to hire a stagecoach driver. Stagecoach drivers in, and he asks the first one, he says, "How close can you get to the edge of this cliff without falling over? How close can you get the stagecoach?" And he says, I'm a pretty good driver. I feel pretty confident I could get us within a foot, maybe within 6 inches of the edge of this cliff without falling off. He says, okay, and he brings in the next person, and he asks the same question. How close can you get this stagecoach to the edge of the cliff without falling off? He says, well, once I get to know it, right up to the very edge. Right there, the wheels are on the edge, 1 inch more, and we fall off. I could get us right to the very edge, and we won't fall off. And so he dismisses that one and brings in the third interviewee for the job. And he asks him this question. He says, how close can you get to the edge without us falling off? And to that, the man says, sir, when I drive a stagecoach, I don't get anywhere near the edge. And the third person got the job. All of us understand this. When we're going through life, maturity, wisdom is not getting as close to the edge as you possibly can. It's not thinking it will never happen to me. It's not thinking, well, yeah, I've done this before, or I've seen this person get away with this before, and it will never happen to me. Wisdom and maturity is staying away from the edge altogether. Wisdom and maturity is establishing a guardrail, a safe zone between yourself and danger so that you don't tiptoe right up to the very edge of pain and heartache and grief and misery. And what Solomon is saying here is that the prudent sees evil and doesn't tiptoe right up to the very edge of it. The prudent sees evil, and what does it say he does? Hides himself. Now, the thing about hiding yourself, you might have some people who say, well, gosh, aren't you a little bit extreme? Aren't you a little bit extreme to set up those boundaries in your life? Aren't you a little bit extreme to take those measures? But here's the question we have to ask ourselves. Would it be better to be perceived as being a little bit extreme, maybe a little bit cautious, and maybe a little bit protective? Would it be better to be perceived that way or be laughed at when you find yourself at the bottom of the cliff because you got too close and you fell over? See, the principle that Solomon is communicating to us here, the prudent sees danger, sees evil, doesn't tiptoe up to it, he hides himself. He goes on, and we see the portion of this contrast that continues when he says, the prudent sees the evil and hides himself, but, and here's the contrast, but the naive go on and are punished for it. So here's the difference between the prudent and the naive. The prudent person understands that there is a cause and effect. There's a connectedness in life, that what you do today influences the life that you have tomorrow. That everything that you're doing now is creating greater joy or greater sorrow in the future. The naive doesn't realize this. The naive is just going along. The implication here is they don't even see that there's danger ahead. They don't see that there's something that they need to avoid in the future. So whereas the prudent person, the filter they use is their future. The naive, and please hear this, the naive, the filter they use is their feelings. What feels good in the moment. The naive is the person who's not aware of the future consequences of their actions. And so whereas the naive or the simple person, what they feel when they're invited to go to that lunch with the coworker that is not their spouse, that they're a little too attracted to, the naive person says, what's the harm? Nothing bad is going to come from this. Nothing will come to me. Nothing will happen to me. The naive person moves forward. They go on and they suffer for it. The prudent person stops and they realize, okay, there's a cause and effect relationship to life. And if I make this investment with my coworker now that I know that I'm attracted to, that I need to avoid this relationship, I know that this is how affairs get started. This is how adultery happens. The prudent is the person who steps back and they realize the cause and effect nature of life and relationships, and they say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to establish a guardrail now. The naive person is the kind of person who, when they think about something that they want to purchase, they don't think through the end destination. They just think through how good it will feel to buy this new wardrobe or to get this new vehicle or to upsize my home or whatever it is. They're not worried about the long-term consequences. The prudent person is the person who looks and says, okay, first of all, can we afford this without maxing out credit cards and without going into significant debt? The prudent person is aware that this might feel good in the moment to make a financially unwise choice now, but I know that in the end, I'm going to have my name on a bill collector's list. And underneath my name is going to be my phone number and my address, and they're going to hound me, they're going to annoy me, they're going to never let up, and it's going to create stress and drama and tension in my life. The prudent person is the person who steps back and they realize, not what do I feel like right now, they think about the future. The naive person is a person who within a family, they say, you know what, right now it's okay for us to get involved in 500 different activities and be going in all kinds of different directions and have no semblance of a family. It's okay for us for this time period in our lives to neglect worship of Jesus and all kinds of other things. But the prudent person stops and says, okay, the end destination of that is pain. It's heartache. And the prudent person is the person who sees not just what's in front of them right now and how it feels, they think about the future. And listen, if you're going to be a person who avoids pain in your future, you've got to be concerned not just with the current feeling, but with the end future, the end destination. And so here's the principle. Principle number 4 from Proverbs is the principle of avoiding pain. And the principle is this: prevention is better than treatment. And we've all heard this as kind of a colloquial saying, that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And we all experience this in our day-to-day lives. A month or so ago, I took our 3 oldest kids. We went out and hiked a trail, went through a canyon not far from our house. And as we were going along the trail, we learned that some of the people had seen rattlesnakes that day. And so normally it's the case that our kids can wander off and go play in the creek and whatever. And we passed one couple who said that they had seen rattlesnakes, and then another couple. We found 3 people, Rhett and April Graham. They were out there that day and they had seen a big snake. Took a picture of it along the side of the wall. Now here as a parent, here's my option when I know that there are rattlesnakes that are roaming that area. I could say this: you know what? My kids can go off and play. Chances are they're going to be okay. Chances are they're not going to get bitten by a rattlesnake. A rattle will, they'll give the rattle and that'll scare them and they'll run away. But all of you moms out there, you're already probably sweating just a little bit, just thinking about the scenario, right? And my wife is probably too, knowing the way that I'm not always that cautious with our kids. You know this as a parent. When there's danger on the horizon for one of your children, in that instance, I could say, you know what, they've got anti-venom now, and if one of our kids get bit, we'll take them by. You say all those things. You know this. You don't say, okay, yeah, go ahead. We'll just treat the problem later. You know this, that the pain of preventing something is far less than the pain of treating something. And we know this in our everyday lives, and what we need to understand and embrace when we're seeing here this idea of it's a lot better to prevent something than it is to treat something. We know that in our physical lives with snake bites. We know that it's better to try to prevent cancer. Cover your body, don't let too much sun exposure, don't engage in habits that can lead to cancer. It's a lot better to try to prevent it than it is to treat it. But here's what we need to embrace, and I think this is what God's heart for us is in this passage. That's also true in every other area of your life. And I would just encourage you, if you're a teenager right now, you're in your early 20s, there's probably something in the heart of your parent that's saying, please listen to what he's saying. Because your parents have lived this. Your parents, your grandparents have experienced this. They know the pain of experiencing heartache and regret and remorse because they ignored God's principles and they focused on what feels good in the moment. What they realize is that it may feel good in the moment, but it hurts for a very, very long time. And all of us, we should intuitively understand this, that it's far better to prevent a broken home than it is to try to treat a broken home on the back end. It's far better to try to prevent a failed marriage than it is to try to treat a failed marriage. It's far better to try to prevent a bank coming and foreclosing on your home or your vehicle than it is to try to treat a foreclosure on the back end. And so the principle that we see here at work is this idea that it is far better to prevent pain than it is to treat pain. And we know there's something about treatment, 2 things about it. First of all, it costs us a lot more, and it hurts us a lot more. If you want to, just thinking about your physical health, physical body, if you want to prevent issues occurring in the future, you know this, that you have to pay a price. You have to, dole something out. It may cost you on the front end a pair of walking shoes or some weights or exercise equipment or a gym membership. But what it costs you on the front end is far less than the cost of something on the back end when you have to have a procedure or something major or significant. The same thing, my friends, the same thing, the same principle that's true physically, it's also true for your soul. It's true for your family. It's true for your heart. The prudent person sees evil and hides himself. The prudent person is aware that I don't want to continue going down this path toward pain, toward heartache, toward regret. The naive is the person who goes on and they pay the penalty. Well, we're here to make this practical for your life. I want to give you 3 traps. And if we ask the question, how do we prevent pain? So practically, what do we employ? How do we, in our daily lives, prevent pain? I want to give you 3 traps accompanied by 3 guardrails. Now, these are 3 traps that you may not be aware of. Perhaps some of you are. But these 3 guardrails are things that you can begin implementing in your life today. You can implement them in your relationships. You can implement them in your career. You can implement them in your home. So let's see these 3 traps and then the guardrails that are going to help us avoid pain. The first trap is this. Number 1, make major decisions without asking for God's direction. Now this sounds like a pretty simple one, but the basic idea here is that you believe that you can handle life on your own without asking God for His direction and guidance. That is a trap. If you find yourself right now approaching a major decision and you're not inviting God's wisdom, you're not inviting God to speak into that situation and to guide you, it is a trap. So here's the guardrail that you establish, you place in your life today to avoid that trap. It's this, is to Jesus taught us, we know in the Lord's Prayer that he taught the disciples, here's how you are to pray. In that prayer, He said, deliver us from evil. Now that's a powerful prayer that you can begin praying for your family, for your children, for your marriage, for every area of your life. You can begin praying, deliver us from evil, because what it does is it reveals that God knows the future. God knows not just where that gorge is. God knows where the buffalo jump is. God knows what the scheme of the enemy is. God knows what's going to occur through the cause and effect relationship that He's wired into creation. And so when you practice preemptive praying, one of the best preemptive prayers that you can pray is just simply this. It's, God, please close this door if this is not of you. For us here at a church, one of the ways this is operated is for the last 2.5 years or so, there's been a team, a group of folks who've come together and they've been thinking about, praying about the possibility of a facility that everybody can gather under one roof together. All the families from grandma and grandpa down to grandchildren gather under one roof together, be there, have great visibility to I-25 and larger space for us to grow as a church and all kinds of good, positive, healthy things. But all along, there's been one prayer that I pray in my heart, and we want to pray consistently together. It's this, that Father, if this is not of you, please close the door. And no matter how good something may look from the distance, we're always asking God, you see the future, we do not. And one of the reasons why, as we continue that conversation about a new facility, praying that prayer, God continues to open up doors. It gives us a sense of freedom that if there's a point in a time where we stand and say, we believe God is leading us toward this, then you can know this, that God has opened the doors for it to happen. This is true in our personal lives, in things that you're considering doing today for your family, for your own personal life. Pray that prayer. God, if this is not of you, please close the door. The second trap is this trap. Number 2, it's to make major decisions without wise counsel. To assume that you know everything that there is to know, that your vision of everything that is around you is sufficient. The guardrail to establish. If you're moving into some area and you've not sought wise, abundant counsel, the guardrail you need to establish in your life is this. Find a trustworthy person, and I would say persons, to spot and speak to danger. Solomon says elsewhere, Proverbs 13:20, he says, he who walks with wise men will be wise. it's as if there's through osmosis. All you do is you journey with, you rub shoulders with, you hang out with wise people. Over the course of time, you will become wise. Conversely, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. If you hang around foolish people, you don't have to do anything to get hurt except be in their vicinity. And so if you're at a place where you're looking at, okay, God, this is the future destination that I want to arrive at. This is where I want to be 20, 30 years with my family. This is where I want to be 20, 30 years from now with my friendships, with my finances. In any area of your life, you need to be finding people who can spot and speak to danger. Understanding that God has called us to seek wise counsel. It is a guardrail. And let me just say this real quickly. If you find inwardly there's something in you that kind of balks at that idea, like there's something right now that you're considering doing and you're like, oh, I don't want to ask people about that. It's probably a bad idea. And that's probably an indicator that you don't need to do it. If you're reluctant to sit down with somebody that you know, that you trust, that is a wise person, if you're reluctant to sit down and share that idea with them because you think they might say it's a bad idea, it's probably a bad idea. Again, that's the difference between a prudent person and a naive person. A prudent person is not thinking, well, how is this going to make me feel right now? A prudent person is thinking about their future. And if you care about your future, if you care about whether or not your future is filled with greater joy versus greater sorrow, you need to establish this guardrail now. Find a trustworthy person who can spot and speak to the danger that may be on the horizon. The third trap is this, and this is kind of broad, universal, general, but this is the trap that I see as much or more than any other from people. It's this trap, is to believe that it can never happen to you. Whatever it is, that addiction can never happen to me. That failed home can never happen to me. That abuse with my kids can never happen to me. Listen to me, my friends. The world is filled with people who are grieving and mourning with deep heartache, with deep regret, with deep remorse, because they had the audacity to believe that this will never happen to me. Let me tell you very directly and as pointedly as I can, there is nothing special about you. There is nothing special about you avoiding this principle. God in His grace is a good Father who communicates danger on the horizon, and you'll avoid it. No matter what people say about you hiding or taking refuge, you'll avoid it. If you're a naive person, you'll continue going on. But listen to me, you will pay people who they live with this idea, this mindset that, yes, I saw that happen to so-and-so, but that'll never happen to me. Listen, there is nothing unique or special about you. Every week, I'm reminded in my position, in my role, of pastors who find themselves ministering, proclaiming the gospel, sharing the message of Jesus. And it comes out, oh, this thing was going on in their life, or that relationship was taking place, or they were dances. It's a weekly, ongoing occurrence. And everybody would think that would never happen to them. You know, here's what I'm aware of today. It can absolutely 100% happen to me. It could happen that my kids have, like two dads. It could happen that my marriage ends up ending. It could happen that I ruin my ministry, ruin my vocational career. All of that could happen because it takes decades to build a life. It takes one season to ruin it. And I would plead with you, if you're a young person here today, Well, what I don't want, and the concern is that everybody who agrees with and says yes to this message, you're people who've experienced this and lived it. So the goal is for those of you who you've not yet gone down that path of destruction and pain to see what God is teaching us in His Word and say, I need to be a wise person who doesn't filter things through how it feels right now, but I filter things through the future that I believe God, my Father, wants me to have in the future. That's the goal, my friend. There's a place not far from where I grew up is a little community called Calhoun. And it's way out in the middle of nowhere. And to get to Calhoun, you have to go through a winding country road. And parts of that road, there's a steep cliff, steep drop-off just adjacent to that road. And so one night there was a young high school girl who was driving home along that road. She never arrived at her house. Her parents, as you can understand, were alerted, called the sheriff's department, called the highway patrol, and all through the night searched and couldn't find her. Early the next morning, as light was beginning to dawn, they saw at the bottom of the cliff, off the side of that road, her car. And they found that the girl had wrecked and was not alive. You know, after that, they did two things. The first thing they did is they called an ambulance. And the ambulance went out, and at that point, there was not anything that could be done for that young girl. Second thing they did is they established a guardrail. The local community came together, and they had some issues getting it done, but they came together and they built a guardrail. The time to establish a guardrail in your life is before you go off the cliff. The time to establish a guardrail in your financial life is before you go so far into debt that you cannot get your way out. The time to establish a guardrail in your life and what you consume into your body, it's before you take the first drink or before you take the first pill. The time to establish a guardrail in your marriage and in your home is before you have to call the lawyer and say, I don't think that there's any way that this thing can be salvaged. And really the question that I want you to leave with today and the picture in your mind is this. Would you rather go to the trouble and the work of establishing a guardrail at the top of the cliff? And know that it's going to be maybe a little bit difficult and challenging, and not everybody's going to understand why you've established these boundaries, and some people may think it's a little bit odd or a little bit weird. Would you rather go to the trouble of establishing that guardrail at the top of the cliff? Or would you rather have to call 911 when you've gone off the cliff and you're at the bottom about to die? The prudent sees evil and hides himself. The naive go on and suffer the penalty. I want to encourage you and just say today that you would become the kind of person who realizes those three traps. And you, in your life, you would incorporate those three guardrails. The third guardrail being, flee, don't flirt. That if you realize there is danger, you realize there is pain on the horizon, you wouldn't say, I'm going to get as close to this as I can get. You would be the kind of person who flees. For your word, I thank you for your spirit that you speak to us today. And as I've prayed before, I pray now that you bring your word to life, that we see here this day the power of this principle of avoiding pain, that it is far better to prevent pain than it is to try to treat it on the back end. I pray this day for your Spirit to guide us to apply this to our lives. In the great name of Jesus, we pray.